Day 27 of the war with Iran, and here's where things stand. Rising fuel prices have forced the U.S. Postal Service to impose an 8% surcharge on all of your packages. And inflation is now expected to top 4%. That's according to one estimate. As for Donald Trump, he faces no good options to end the war he started and growing frustration among the American public over the economic pain his war is causing. Brand new reporting from the Wall Street Journal reveals that, quote, nearly 1 month into the war, the president has privately informed advisors he thinks the conflict is in its final stages, urging them to stick to the 4 to 6 week timeline he's outlined publicly. At the White House today, Donald Trump denied the reporting and said he is, quote, the opposite of desperate. But it is becoming increasingly clear that he has few good options. The Iranian regime has rejected a U.S. peace proposal. There are no active negotiations between the United States and Iran at this moment. 2 U.S. officials and 2 sources with knowledge tell Axios the Pentagon is plotting a, quote, final blow that would involve boots on the ground. Among the options Trump could choose from, seizing Karg Island, where most of Iran's oil is exported from, capturing Iranian territory to allow for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, or blocking ships that are exporting Iran's oil. Many of these possibilities involve boots on the ground. And Axios warns that, quote, many of the scenarios under discussion would risk prolonging and intensifying the fight rather than bringing it to a dramatic conclusion. And that is something Trump does not want to do. U.S. officials tell the Wall Street Journal that, quote, Trump is willing to order U.S. troops on Iranian soil, but is reluctant to do so in part because it could upend his goal of a speedier end to the conflict. He is concerned that the number of U.S. troops killed or injured in the operation could rise if the war continues. The president being confronted with his limited options for an off-ramp, none leading to his original stated goal of regime change, and his war of choice with Iran is where we begin today. Washington Post reporter John Hudson is here. He covers the State Department and national security. Also with us, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. And former Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman is here. She led the U.S. negotiating team that reached an agreement on the Iran nuclear deal back in 2015. General Hertling, how sobering that reporting from Axios about the options that the Pentagon is laying before the president. Your take on the options that are being floated?
Yeah, it's troubling, Alicia. We've talked about this before, but we're talking about different courses of actions to bring a political solution to this, and you're not going to do that with troops on the ground, I don't think. You've got various courses of actions, and one of the things we've discussed in the past is something called the troop-to-task ratio. When there's all different kinds of potential tasks for a military organization to accomplish, they're spread very thin. We currently have 2 Marine Expeditionary Units and 1 airborne brigade with an airborne headquarters flowing into the region. That's 10,000 forces. That seems like a lot, but when you're talking about the size of the country of of Iran, and the potential that they have to defend themselves with air defense equipment, drone strikes, explosively formed penetrators like they used in such great numbers in Iraq when I was there, they are not going to sit still and just wait for the U.S. forces to invade. They're going to defend their country because this is an existential threat for Iran. They know that there are dangers lurking, and they're defending their sovereign territory. It doesn't matter what we think in terms of whether or not they have a bad regime or the Ayatollah is a bad human being and they're oppressing their people. They still have a desire with the Revolutionary Guard Corps to defend what they see as sovereign territory.
General Hertling, I'm reminded of what Trump's own former defense secretary, Jim Mattis, said just this week about the way Trump is handling the war. Quote, targetry never makes up for a lack of strategy. And when I listen to this reporting, I'm hearing a lot of tactics. I am not, at least in my interpretation of what I am reading, seeing a strategy come together. So if each of these tactics is specifically aimed at opening the Strait of Hormuz, then theoretically that then, assuming it were successful, allows ships carrying oil to get through. Then what? What happens then?
That's what we've been talking about, Alicia, since the very start of this war. If you don't have an end state, the means that you use the military to conduct, along with the ways you're using them to conduct those means, it doesn't fit together. We're seeing battles, kinetic strikes, the potential use of military forces, whether it be a Marine unit or an Army unit. But again, what are you trying to achieve? Now it seems it's an economic purpose. Open the Straits of Hormuz, try and get the markets back. I'm not so sure that's the best way to use military forces. Unless you have a political end state, you're going to waste a lot of lives. And I think that was apparent in your opening statement. And what you're going to see in terms of forces going into combat on the ground are going to face much more difficulties than you see when you have airplanes and Tomahawk missiles bombing from 30,000 or 10,000 feet. It's just a different ballgame. You're seeing the force involve itself in human interactions on the ground, in tough terrain, in geography that is very different than anything we faced recently. Trying to establish a waterway to get ships out, if that's the purpose, if that is the political end state, you're going to need a whole lot more troops to conduct that task.
So, Wendy, I want you to help me connect the dots between that military analysis and the diplomatic analysis. You have Axios reporting inside the administration. There are folks who think the show of force would increase their leverage against Iran. When you are talking about diplomacy, do you buy that?
Well, look, I think we always need a credible threat of force in any negotiation of this nature. However, as General Hertling knows, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the war. So the closure of the strait is a consequence of the war, not a cause of it. And indeed, the president and Steve Witkoff today talked about putting in front of Iran a 15-point plan, which Iran says is impossible. And in fact, the gap is enormous. And Pakistan, the country that ostensibly has been trying to mediate, sending messages back and forth, today it appears that the Pakistani embassy in Tehran and the Pakistani ambassador's residence got hit by a missile, whether it was ours or Israel's or something else. But nonetheless, there are unintended consequences of this kind of war, where, as the general has said, the tactics may be good, the battles may go well, our military is excellent, but there is no strategy. And indeed, all we have accomplished here, painfully, besides the death of Americans and the death of so many civilians in the region, including in Iran, is that we now have a more radical, as I call them, the hardliners. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is now in charge. And because there have been two instances where we have been negotiating with Iran only to attack them, the Iranians are not going to be in a rush to believe that they can get a deal that meets their national interest just because we want it.
Well, Wendy, in light of that analysis, you have the Journal reporting that some people close to Trump are urging him to go harder, saying regime change in Iran could be legacy defining. I mean, are they in la la land? Because I'm not understanding any of this to be bringing us closer to that goal.
Well, there has been a segment of our population and our political class who have believed for a long time that the regime should be ended and we should do it by force. But that is going to take a lot of troops. That is going to take boots on the ground. I know that some are suggesting that the president say, here's our proposal. If the folks who are in charge don't agree, well, let's decapitate them and get to the next level until we find some folks who will agree. But all we have done as a result of these tactics is to increase the nationalization of it, the nationalism in Iran. This is a country with a great history of pride and resilience and resistance. And all we have done, I believe, is increase their resistance. They have asymmetric tactics they can use. As the general has mentioned, they are not going to give up easily. They are not going to capitulate just because we want them to. And as the general said, none of us likes this regime. All of us want the people of Iran to have freedom. And of course, none of us want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's something we've worked for a long, long time. These tactics aren't getting us there.